Hey everybody, my name is Driskell. I'm the CEO and founder of Rhynestone Productions and the host of the Rhynestone podcast. At Rhynestone Productions, we have one goal, and that is to empower all musical creatives to make their best and most authentic music, whether that's through our virtual studio, whether that's through our consults, whether that's through our podcast. We want to help you. And our podcast is an extension of that as we interview the best musicians in the world and try to devour and learn their tips, their tricks, and their strategies in order to apply that to our own musical careers so that we can grow, so that we can break in, and we can learn how the music industry works. We can learn how the professionals practice. We learn how the professionals rehearse. We learn how professionals collaborate. We learn the tips and tricks so that you can take your music to the next level. And, honestly, I have been so amazed by so many guests on this podcast. This one might be one of the best ones we've done yet. Erykah Feingold has been blowing up on Instagram these last few months. If you're a guitar player like me, you've definitely seen her work. She's been doing just phenomenal things. She is showing people that what really lands jobs in the music industry is having a tight pocket and a rhythm, and where if you play the music lifts up. And it's this really unique and powerful skill, and it's so effective that it even comes across through Instagram, which honestly, for the most part, feels lifeless and soulless most of the time, if we're being honest. And Ella has just shown that rhythm guitar and the way that she plays is so important. So we dive into Ella's career, we dive into her playing with Erykah Badu, we dive into her doing orchestration for massive video games like Destiny. We dive into so many topics. It's really great. We talk about playing in church, which is becoming a theme on this podcast. You guys haven't noticed how many people play in church. We're also diving into the way that you lock in better with a drummer, the way you improve your rhythm. You dive into all sorts of different things. And frankly, this was just such an amazing podcast with someone who's also on the up and up and is just doing great work. So we really enjoyed our time with Ella. I think you guys are going to learn a ton from this podcast, and I can't wait for you guys to dive in. So without further ado, here's Erykah Feingold. Welcome back to the Rhynestone podcast, where we delve into the extraordinary journeys of music's brightest stars. I'm your host, Driskell, and today we have the distinct pleasure of spotlighting the incomparable Erykah Feingold. Ella is not just a musician, she is a force of nature, weaving her talents as an orchestrator, guitarist, composer, and producer into a tapestry of sonic brilliance. With a resume that reads like a who's who of the music industry, Ella's contributions have left an indelible mark on the world of music. As an orchestrator, her touch can be heard in the works of chart-topping artists like Ariana Grande and Gwen Stefani, as well as iconic projects such as the Destiny video game series and Godzilla King of Monsters. Meanwhile, her skills as a guitarist have seen her share the stage and studio with legends like Silk Sonic, Jay-Z, Janet Jackson, and so many others. But Ella's influence extends beyond traditional boundaries. Through her engaging content on Instagram and Patreon, she's become a digital sensation, captivating audiences with her insightful breakdowns of funk guitar classics. Her viral videos have caught the attention of artists like Bootsy Collins, Phoebe Bridgers, and John Mayer, solidifying her reputation as a leading authority in the world of rhythm guitar. Join us as we journey through the remarkable career of Erykah Feingold, explore her musical prowess, her Grammy-winning achievements with Silk Sonic, and the digital footprint she's leaving on the music world. Erykah Feingold, welcome to the Rhynestone podcast. How are you doing, my friend?
Wow, that was incredibly generous introduction and very thorough. Thank you.
Absolutely. We only do the best for our guests here.
I'm feeling the love.
So, Ella, with a career like yours, there are so many different paths and avenues we could go, and I want to explore all of them because you've had just one of the coolest careers in music. I mean, it's just all over the place. But I want to start somewhere specific, and I want you to tell me about somebody. Who is Spanky Alford, and why is he important to your story?
Oh, yeah. It's a good place to start because a lot of it does start with them. So Spanky Alford was my first real mentor on guitar. And I would say he has been the one musician that has literally changed my life. Not just as a person, but as a musician, my career, everything. Just the most profound person I've met. And so basically you're going to see my cat kind of do what he wants to do while we're doing this interview. I was going to college at Berklee School of Music, And he was my favorite guitar player. He wasn't necessarily the most famous guitar player, but there were so many records that he played on, like D'Angelo and God, so many. Raphael Sadiq, Tony, God, like Mighty Clouds of Joy. Sorry, my cat is chewing on my phone.
No worries here. We're cat friendly here at the Rhinestone Podcast.
Yeah, sorry, he's the boss. So he, I just profoundly admired him as a musician. And when I was going to college, I felt sort of unfulfilled on guitar. Like I felt like he had something incredibly important that wasn't really spoken about or taught. And I wanted to learn it from him directly. So you have to remember that this was, 2001, 2002, way before social media and Google maybe Google was there for a couple of years. But there was no social media. There isn't the visibility like there is now. So I had to like really hunt to find him and get his phone number and call around and kind of investigate, And I found that he was teaching at a local music store when he wasn't on the road. And I was fascinated by that, just like, I can't believe he would like teach people locally, because to me, he's like such an incredible musician. So we finally touched base. And I just told him, like, I've got every record you've played on, all your session work and everything. And we would play guitar for each other, over the phone and stuff. And he was even more incredible than I ever imagined because I had only ever heard him on record. So you never really get a sense of a musician until you sit with them and you hear them improvise. And when they're able to express themselves exactly how they want. So I was even more floored. And one day he just cold called me. I should back up by that. We had spoken for maybe 6 months, a year on and off. And after that time, he had just called me. I was in the middle of finals at Berkeley. It was my first year going to school. And he just said, hey, I just got home. He had just gotten home from, I think, a Roy Hargrove date in New York. It was around the holidays. And he's like, I've got a few weeks off. Would you like to come to Huntsville, Alabama and come hang out and play guitar? And, he didn't even look at it like, do you want to study with me? Or it was just like, do you want to come hang out and, and play music? And I just knew, I was only 21, 22 back then. I'm 43 now. I just knew that was the most important musical decision I was going to make in my career. I don't know how I knew, but I just knew. So I dropped out of college. I told my parents, I know I'm in the middle of finals. I'm quitting and I'm going to Alabama to study with this guy. And they just didn't understand it. And, anyways, to sort of speed up the story a little bit, we met and I got to sit across from him and play guitar with him and shed and ask questions. And, he would even ask me some questions for like a week straight, And I was just losing my mind because I could be like, oh, what did you play on that D'Angelo record? How did that, it's looked like this, right? And you'd be like, oh, it's close, but I'm actually fingering it like this. It's like, imagine whoever your greatest musical, hero, idol is and getting to just sit across from them and, ask them questions. And he knew how deeply moved I was by the experience and how grateful I was to be there. I know he felt it. And basically, when I left, I learned a lot of things, I learned a different way of approaching the guitar, just harmonically and moving through chords and the touch of the instrument. But I would say probably the biggest thing that I learned, which shaped, the woman I am today and how I am on social media or whatever, was like musical generosity. because this man stopped what he was doing and just sat with me for a week. Took me to choir practice, took me to church. I mean, just patiently sat with me. I mean, who does that? You know, he didn't really even know me that well. I know he sensed my admiration to him and how much work I had done to learn, you know, about him. And it's still to this day. I mean, you know, there's a lot of amazing things that have happened in my career that I'm so grateful for. But that is the coolest thing that's ever happened to me musically. So, and when I got home, I sounded like a different guitar player. And he, you know, said, listen, you got to join, you know, an all black Pentecostal church, you know, to get your ear together and your feel. And I did, and I played in church for years. And then when I, you know, started to fast forward, you know, when I did start to like be a professional musician and get on the road, word sort of traveled a little bit like, oh, that's Spanky's student, you know what I mean? And so many people just admired Spanky, Questlove being one of them, and James Poyser, you know, the Soulquarians. So it carried a lot of weight, you know, and opened some doors for me, just the association with him. So that's my story on Spanky. And I do just want to say, I hope I get to do that one day for someone else. Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. I mean, what an experience to be able to sit down with one of your idols and just ask them and hit them with questions, and not only get to like learn from them musically, but also to experience like what they're like in their day-to-day life and learn things, like you said, like musical generosity. What were some of the biggest takeaways of your time studying with him in that week? I mean, were there, obviously you talked about like joining a Black Pentecostal church, but were there any other things that you learned that were big takeaways for you from that intense week masterclass with him?
I mean, one thing was just that he was just like me, like sitting down with the CD player back then and rewinding and transcribing a lot. And we were listening to a lot of the same records back then, Johnny Smith and the Joe Pass virtuoso stuff. A lot of just solo jazz guitar, classic, you know, Grant Green, George Benson, all that stuff. But he taught me just a new way to navigate through some of the chord voicings that I already knew. He just had a unique style in that, like, there is a genre of guitar, well, music, you know, quartet, just, you know, gospel music. You could say it's like very heavily influenced by guitar, you know, in gospel music, where other stuff is like a choir and organ and, you know, and it's sort of almost a little more like Curtis Mayfield. It's like soul guitar, you know, with usually 4 or 5 singers. So he came from that tradition. However, he was incredibly influenced by jazz. So he would take jazz harmony, a la Wes Montgomery, Kenny Burrell, like I said, Johnny Smith, Joe Pass, and he would fuse that into the triadic gospel harmony and you know, the Curtis Mayfield kind of drippings and arpeggios and all that. And he had this flow, the way that somebody would flow and improvise, like with single notes. He had that kind of flow with chords and harmony and all that stuff. So I'd say that was probably the most profound impact that, you know, I walked away with, was just the chordal stuff.
Now, were these lessons like structured in any way with him, or was it just
not at all. No. He's not a teacher, and I sort of say I'm not a teacher either. I mean, I am, but like I look at myself as like I know a lot, and if you ask me the right questions, you know, I'll answer anything, and I have a lot of experience. I think that I'm good at conveying things because people seem to mirror that back to me. I guess when I say I'm not a good teacher, I mean it in the sense that I'm not very theoretical. I teach by ear. And that's how I learned to play. And that doesn't connect with some people. They want tablature, or they want it written out, or they want a story behind why something is the way that it is. And I don't always give that because I don't necessarily think about music that way sometimes. And again, it wasn't how Spanky taught me, and it's not how I learned to play music. So,
did he give you any homework while you guys were working together? Like, was there any like, all right, you need to learn all your minor ninth inversions or anything like that?
Nothing like that. No, it was very like conversational, and just, a lot. We would jam a lot together. We would transcribe stuff together. A lot of it was, well, I remember when I first sat down with him, the first thing he said to me is like, all right, show me what you want to do. And I'm like, what I want to do? Or like, show me what you're trying to do. So I played a little bit, and he's like, okay, well, don't go there, try this. And what was great is, I was studying, at Berkeley with a guy named Richie Hart. And Richie's a real serious, straight ahead, like hard bop guitar player. Unintentionally, Richie sort of prepared me for Spanky in the sense of teaching me a lot of the harmony that were on all of these records. And the way Richie taught me is completely by ear. And I mean, when I say completely by ear, he would have the instrument in his hand and he would have his back to me, or he would tell me to close my eyes, and he'd say, okay, here we go. And I would have to find the chord. And he'd say, stop, you're thinking. What's the top note? Sing it. Find, that's how I learned to play. It wasn't, here's what we're doing, my finger's here, it's an E minor 9/11 chord. None of that. None of that. If anything, he might look at the chord and say, well, what do you see? And I'm like, well, yeah, I guess it's E minor 9/11 or E minor 9 or whatever. And he'd be like, look at it again. What's on the bottom of the chord? E minor, okay, or E minor 7. What's on the top of the chord? I'm like, I guess B minor. So it was a very like reduced, simplified way of thinking about things and using my ear. So when I met Spanky, I mean, he would show me what he played, but I could hear all of the stuff, and when I would hear him play something, I'd be like, oh, Spanky got that from the, the Joe Pass virtuoso thing, but he inserted 5 chords in between. So it was like I wasn't necessarily fluent in a language, but enough to listen at the dinner table and know what the adults were saying.
That's a really fascinating concept about the learning the chords by ear and kind of ear first, head second approach to it. How does one practice that, if I might ask?
I mean, in the simplest possible way, in terms of playing by your ear, sing a note, da, just, I mean, I guess I was in between a G and an A flat, and then sing 2 notes, da, da, and then find it, and then 3. And what it does is it connects you to your instrument. There's like this, it like becomes a part of you. You just sing a note and you just know where it is. And the point of it is not to go, when you're, da. So I was 1 note off. Not bad, right? It's to quickly instinctually find it, not to go, what was that in relation to what I last think? Like you're going off of instinct and intuition, because the musical moment is past you if you're thinking that slowly, and so you build these things up. And that's what, Richie, my first teacher, taught me. And I'm sure he learned that from George Benson, because him and George used to hang out, and George taught him a lot of things back in the late 70s. And, it's like, do you want to learn a language by going to a university and reading a book? Like, let's say French, for example. And I'm not, by the way, I'm not saying one is better than the other. Um, or do you want to get dumped in France for a year and become fluent by conversationally listening and throwing yourself in the fire? That's how I learned to play music. Um, as an orchestrator, I mean, obviously, I have to know how to read music and have an understanding of things. As a guitar player, I just don't think about those things at all. It's way more. It's just instinctual, and it's like hearing, like my cat was hanging out over here. So like for a native English speaker, it's like hearing the word cat and just automatically going, "Yep, I know what a cat looks like. I know it's CAT. I know the letters." Like you don't think about it. And so with a lot of this stuff, you know, when I hear I just automatically know that's a minor 9/11 chord because I've said the word before. I've spoken the word. I've heard the word spoken to me, meaning that voicing. So I just hear it, but not by learning that there's a 9 and an 11 and, um, maybe not the most traditional approach, but it's what's, worked for me.
No, I absolutely love it. I struggle as a musician with my ear. My ear is the thing. I can hear something and know if it works, or I can know the sonics of it. But as far as like, finding the note, that's like always been something that's really struggled with me. So the fact that you've made it in such a way that it's instinctual. I remember when I was in music school, they do the intervals training like they do in theory one, and I would just suck at that. And I could, I'd have to, if I tried to learn something in like a lesson by ear, I would just struggle and struggle and struggle. So the fact that you've just made it so like no second guessing, just instinctual, figure it out, I think is actually like a really important lesson for guitar players and any musician really to learn for sure. Did you have a good ear before doing all that? Like before you went to Berkeley?
A decent ear. I have a very strange ear. Like, I don't think I'm on the spectrum, but I can hyper focus on something that most people won't hear. Just a 6 note chord voicing. I can hear it's a flat wound with high action and a light guitar pick, or round wounds with low, whatever. Like, I can just hear all kinds of weird stuff and a lot of times richer harmony. It's easier for me to hear that than for someone to play Happy Birthday, a monophonic line, and for me to find it on guitar. For some reason, it's easier for me to hear 5 notes than one sometimes. And I'm guessing it's just because what I go after is rhythm and texture and color and harmony, and I'm not really a lead player, so I'm not really particularly chasing after, um, you know, solos and single lines and stuff like that. I'm not saying I'm deaf and I can't hear it, but for some reason, it's harder to hear that, for me.
Well, I mean, it seems like that works perfectly for what you do now. I mean, with the chords. I mean, if you hear it in blocks like that, I mean, that's what you do. I mean, that's it works out
Yeah.
perfect.
But I feel like my ear's constantly getting a little bit better or more refined. Just the more music I listen to and records, and I'm sure anyone who's listening to the podcast can identify with this, where you have like a record that you just love, you grew up, or you just listen to it all the time, and then maybe one day you're out for a walk and you have headphones on, and you're like, "How did I never hear that clavinet part in the left speaker? Like, did that just get implanted?" Like, it's so I try every day to do some sort of ear training, and not necessarily in the traditional way, but just by listening and engaging with music and just trying to hear things and being open to just hearing things. Yeah.
So after you studied with Spanky, you said that you went to go play in a Black Pentecostal church. Now, what's really funny about this will be episode 16 of the Rhinestone podcast,
Uh-huh.
and it is unbelievable how many musicians have learned their chops from church, specifically Black church.
Oh, yeah, I was going
And
to say the African American musicians.
there's been a couple that have gotten it on No shame on Hillsong, but um, but as far as that goes, what were some of the big things you learned playing in a Black Pentecostal church as far as a musician?
It's a great question because it kind of just answers better what you just asked me about ear training, which is it teaches you ear training and instinct because nobody sat and was like, okay, Ella, well, so it's E minor 9, and then it's going to an E flat major 9 sharp 11, and then there was no rehearsals, there was no discussion. It just was I say get, I didn't invent it, but the phrase get in where you fit in. And in a lot of more contemporary gospel music, apparently it's changed these days, but 80s, 90s, early 2000s, music was very harmonically colorful and rich, almost like Take Six harmony, a lot of reharmonization, diminished passing chords. It was just the harmonic rhythm of the music was very dense. So I had to find a way to get inside of the music and navigate through it without anyone telling me what to do. And by habituation and showing up every Sunday, my ear improved. By getting over some fear, my ear improved. By saying to myself, it's not about trying to say that it's, E minor 9/11 to A13 to this. What's a part that you can come up with that goes inside and through the music? Keyboard players already playing all the changes. You're not going to out reharm them and whatever. So it was just a different approach, to music. And I feel like that really, really got my ear together, and it, I can talk about some other experiences maybe later in the interview. Like there was a experience, with Erykah Badu, but, playing in church sort of prepared me for that sort of no rehearsal, get in where you fit in, cameras on, 3, 2, 1, go,
So what was your first church gig like, and what was your last church gig like in that time period? Like, how much of a transformation of a musician did you have?
Oh, that's a really deep question. Wow. Well, my first church gig was showing up at a all-Black Pentecostal church in Dorchester, suburb of Boston, and asking if I could sit in. They didn't have a guitar player. I don't even remember how I chose that church. I'm not sure. And I just remember getting my ass handed to me. The drummer was a guy named Charles Haynes, who's a good friend of mine. He plays for everyone. Lady Gaga, Michelle Indigiocello. He's just one of my favorite drummers. Versatile, amazing producer. And then there was a guy named Keith Harris on keys. Keith is actually a drummer. He was the drummer for the Black Eyed Peas. But of course, he's a killing organist. So he was doing the gig on organ. I didn't even know he was a drummer at first. So those two guys, it was a really small band. So, I can't remember who played bass. And sorry, my cat's going to knock some stuff over. And I just remember being so overwhelmed and feeling like I'm just not good enough. And it had nothing to do with the musicians. They weren't, shaming me or anything. If anything in Black church, at least for me as like a white girl back then, it was more like, go ahead, like go get some, like go get yours. It's like they were rooting for me, but I didn't, imposter syndrome. And I'm like, here I am, like the only white chick in this Black church. And I just sort of felt like an imposter musically, not as a person, just like, I want to play and reach someone like these musicians are, That was my first gig. The last gig I did I had moved to Los Angeles, and I was playing at this like mega church. I was playing at the Forum, playing for Faithful Central, and there was another church. And so some of the musicians had booked just a small random gig somewhere, and also badass music, like the keyboard players, Cassandra, who played for Prince, and just killing musicians. And I just got so deeply moved. If you ask them the story, they'll tell you like it was the Holy Ghost. I'm an atheist. I don't believe in God at all. I just believe in being a good and kind person and loving people. And if you need to get that through God, that's amazing. I don't need it through God. I get it myself. So they'll tell you I was possessed by the Holy Ghost. I just think that, I was deeply moved by music, but everyone stopped playing. And it was like this out of body experience. And I ended up just, playing, and people were crying in the audience and whatever. It was like solo guitar, and I had sort of become disillusioned from the church. There was some stuff that maybe is not worth getting into, but just some things with money, nothing to do with me, just people being greedy with money and sort of seeing just a more human side of church. I was sort of already on my way out by then. And that gig was just overwhelming. And I remember calling Spanky and telling him about it, and was like, whoa, this was crazy. I mean, I just started, it wasn't a part of the show, but they stopped playing and all this. And so he was like, well, it was the Holy Ghost. And so now you have a responsibility to do this and do that and minister to people. And I just was like, no, I'm not going to do it. And I should say, Spanky was an incredibly holy person, religious person, and he anointed my hands, so there's a part of me, it's a little bit torn with religion.
What does that mean, anointed your hands? What does that mean? Like he I'm imagining like no way, really?
It was a storefront church in Alabama, and they anointed my hands with Crisco oil or Wesson, one of the two. Yeah.
That is so deeply Southern. Is this Huntsville, Alabama?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that you're definitely not getting that up in Massachusetts. That's definitely a Southern experience right there.
Yes, sir. Yeah. Yeah. So that was my last experience. There was a lot, in between, and it's up to you. It's your podcast. I mean, I'm happy to tell you reasons why I don't do it anymore. But I don't really play gospel music anymore.
It's up to you. If you want to go into it, let's go into it.
Okay. Well, for those that don't know, I'm a transgender woman. And I just received a lot of, sort of backlash for my identity, for who I am, from a lot of religious folks. Mostly white, evangelical, Republican Christians, not necessarily Black folks. But, it sort of left a sour taste in my mouth how a lot of people were made to feel othered and less than in the church for being within the LGBTQ plus, spectrum. That never sat right with me, So there were just rubs that I just didn't like. I loved church for the community and the music and ministering to people and people having a place to go to feel like they're a part of something and get fed spiritually or whatever. I think that's a really beautiful thing. However you find that, whether that's church or just community that you have. But I just didn't like the hypocrite, the people being hypocrites and the hypocrisy, and just didn't sit right with me, So I just chose not to do that stuff anymore because of that, Um, yeah.
Hey, y'all, at the Rhinestone Podcast, we are trying our best to get better and better and better guests. And one way that you can help us do that is by hitting that subscribe button down below. A lot of people who are checking out the podcast have not subscribed yet. And while we are not shaming you, we would really appreciate if you could take a second to subscribe. When we have these numbers up, it means we can get better and better guests. And when we get better and better guests, you guys have the chance to learn more and more about music and learn about the music game and the music industry and hear all these great stories and all these different things. As we're getting further and further and further along into the music world, I just want to get better and better people on so that you guys can keep learning and keep improving your game and get out there and take your music as far as you possibly can with all the information that we've presented in these episodes. If nothing else, I'm learning a ton, and that makes it worth it. But please subscribe. Hit that subscribe button. It means the world to me, and it will help us get better and better guests on.
Leaving church or back then I was still playing in church. I had also joined like a wedding band. So I was learning, the American songbook, I guess, or a songbook. So I the expression like doing your 10,000 hours. I think it's Malcolm Gladwell that maybe said that. I had done my 10,000 hours, I had studied with Spanky. I was playing in church. I was playing in a wedding band. I was playing at a club called Wally's Jazz Cafe, and we were just playing instrumental funk music for hours, a couple nights a week. So I had all of these, pokers in the fire, and I got a call. So the first thing I want to say is I was prepared to tour. I got a call to audition for Britney Spears, and it was sort of like a favor. I was like, it must have been like 19 or something, and it was kind of like, let this kid audition. They're not going to get the gig, but I beat everybody out except for two other people. The other guitar player is this guy Errol Cooney, who's an amazing guitar player. He plays for Janet Jackson now, and the MD was Ricky Minor, who did, he was the MD for Jay Leno, American Idol. So that was years ago, and he was just like, I got you up here, and I'll let you know when the time's right. And it must have been somewhere 2 or 3 years later. And he called me and he said, Queen Latifah is going out on tour this summer, and we need a guitar player. And I think you'd be right for the gig. So whatever you're doing, stop, pack a quick bag, get on the first flight out. I'll reimburse you for the flight. You don't have time to pack or anything. Just, I need you on the first plane you can get out here. And, if you don't get the gig, you'll go home. And if you get the gig, you can go back home and pack and, whatever. So I literally just sort of had like my guitar and a toothbrush and, only a couple of things. And I get through security thinking I'm flying there to audition. And I get a call and he just says, hey, congratulations, the gig is yours to lose. And it took me a second, like, wait, what does that mean?
Yeah, what does that mean?
Yeah, like it's yours unless you lose it, from not doing your job. It's kind of a weird thing to say to someone for their first gig. So that's how it all started. And that just opened up the door to many other experiences and opportunities, which I could also talk about. But that was the first thing, that really opened up the gates or the books, for me to really have a career. I mean, I had been performing and getting paid to play music since I was 15, maybe. I've worked in bands in high school and, would gig during the week. But this was like my first real, like, oh, wow, like I'm making money. Like I have a guitar tech, like it was very, very pinch me surreal for a while. Yeah.
So, like we mentioned in the intro, you have played with so many people. I mean, one can go to your website and look at all the people you've performed with, and it's just you are so in demand. And we'll get into some of these artists that you've worked with. Um, but I do have a question from a more career standpoint from a touring musician. So, obviously, we're both in America. There are every weekend there's a bunch of musicians out playing shows, and they're playing, songs, cover songs, things like that. What separates someone from like a weekend bar musician from like a top level touring musician? Because, a lot of those top level touring people, on the surface, it may not seem like a lot of those parts are very complicated or, very hard to play. It's not Dragon Force here. We're talking about, sometimes, I'm not, but I guess what separates what separates those different tiers of musicianship?
Um, I think it depends on the genre of music, and I say that because I think that certain things are valued in certain types of music more than other types. But in the genre I play, Black American music, R&B, you know, funk, hip hop, neo soul, I guess that's what they call it today. Feel will set you apart from anyone. Your touch, your tone, and I can expand on all these things. Your attitude, your willingness to help, to serve a song and not have an ego and overplay. Um, those are some things that definitely come to mind. The first things that come to mind.
So yeah, let's go into some of those. So you said feel. You said feel first. Would that be the most important?
I would say so. Yeah. I mean, feel as in you can sit and pick up a guitar and play D7 for me, and it hits me in the chest. And when you play D7, it's like I've never heard anyone strum D7 like that. It feels so damn good. To me, that's like having a great feel when you can move someone with rhythm. Doesn't have to be syncopated and fancy, but just by touching the instrument, and that does get into touch, but just that your feel, when you think of someone like, I mean, if we talk drummers, like a Questlove or a James Gadson, or, I mean, there's so many amazing drummers I could mention. But it's like their groove. It's just like, oh God, it makes you do this, that face. Yeah. Like every video I make that face, and not even intentionally. Um, so that I think is wildly important to working for that kind of music. I mean, I would like to say that I think all genres of music should feel good, and it doesn't, have to be like funky, but just the rhythm needs to be there. Yeah, that's the most important for me. I would say touch is just, different ways of touching the instrument. Like David T. Walker, he's somebody I did a lesson on today. He has a very delicate touch, and it's like how he is as a person. And it's a unique touch to the instrument. The same way Bill Frisell has a touch on the instrument. When Bill plays the major scale, it's Bill Frisell. When Kurt Rosenwinkel plays the major scale, it's Kurt Rosenwinkel, George Benson, etc. So there's like a touch. Um, Having like a sonic thumbprint, a tone in that, like you don't have some, generic guitar center tone, that you really understand music and, can recreate the Motown backbeat and truly recreate it. Not just, okay, I can hit a triad on the backbeat, but I mean, really the touch of it, the string gauge, the pick, the right reverb, the right EQ post reverb, just really having an understanding of tone and color and stuff like that, having a sound. Yeah.
So I'm going to push back a little bit here because the feel and touch thing. I mean, the way you're describing it, it sounds very vague and almost voodoo like. I mean, it does have a like mystical, like, oh, when Questlove plays the drums, you know it's Questlove. When Bill Frisell plays the guitar, it plays. Is there a way that people can like practice that or like intuitively get better? I mean, because when you first started playing the guitar, you didn't come across like Ella Feingold, did you? I mean, how does one develop that? I mean, I know I have a feeling I know what you're going to say, which is practice and put the time in. But is there anything else that
It's not
can help
actually.
you?
Um,
No, it's not. Okay, I want to hear.
I mean, practice and engaging the instrument, sure, absolutely, because I think that you do refine things over time in the sense like, oh, I'm playing and my wrist is tensing up. So obviously whatever I'm doing isn't serving me. Maybe I should move my hand like this, like this. Maybe I should use a different pick. Maybe, so certainly by habituation, like, yeah, it does influence your sound. Um, Honestly, for me transitioning, I found my voice, I found my sound, and I also stopped.
Transitioning as far as gender, or is
Yeah, 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 yeah. I mean, it's wild to just see like how I emerged not only as a human but musically, and a part of it is, for me at least, being authentic and living authentically and playing from a place of wanting to move yourself and move people and communicate and make them feel something rather than trying to impress someone. I think was a big part in finding my sound, and I'll say it like this: I spent most of my adult years trying to find a sound through other people's sound and wanting to know what gear they used and going through these tangents and studying other genres of music. But again, it wasn't until I truly just stopped, and I don't mean I don't listen to other players and learn, but I just emerged when I started to live authentically and stop lying to myself about who I was, who I was supposed to be or whatever. And I'll tell you the other part, which maybe a lot of people won't identify, but oppression, the segregation and how I'm treated because of who I am has given my playing even more fuel to the fire and authenticity and urgency when I play and the need to communicate. It made music a lot more urgent for me. Um, and I'm not going to compare myself to any other musician, but I guess I'll say there's certain musicians you hear or certain genres where it's like maybe it's not technically speaking, correct or whatever you want to use, but it's so deeply moving. And it's because of their oppression and what they've had to live through. And sorry, my cat jumped on my keyboard. What people have sorry, he's messing me up. What people have had to live through. And if you only knew what I have to live through every day just to exist and be visible, is really hard. And so it's, it comes out in my fingers. Yeah.
well, I mean that's really deep. I mean, I definitely think I think I did say it was a little voodoo-y, but I do think there is something to say about like being like authentic to who you are and that true essence of self. And I think that does come across in music. You can tell when somebody is like really doing the thing they're good at the highest level, and they've put the time in and the effort in, and you can tell when they have done that, like it does come through. And I think that's 100% the truth. I love it. I think that's a really good
Yeah.
answer. And Dave,
Thanks. I mean, you said practice. I maybe I look at I don't really look at what I do a lot of times as practice as much as it is playing. And I think that just the playing a lot has a part to do with it, that it refines something that you do. Um, yeah, I mean, I guess that's maybe a topic for another time, like what is considered practicing and playing, and is it that you only learn from practicing but not playing? And I think for me, I don't practice ever. I just play for hours every day, and refine who I am more and more just by playing, you know.
So do you not have like disciplined regiment? Like,
No,
I bring my tea in and then I start scales and
no,
I stretch my hands. Nothing like that, really.
nothing, never have. No. I mean, it's kind of like so it's communication, right? And in order for us to communicate, I don't have to know every word in the thesaurus and dictionary. And I don't have to have the best diction or even use the best language in order for you to feel me and be moved by me. Maybe all those things do move you, if I use certain fancy words, but I mean, I can also speak like a 6-year old and move you deeply. And I sort of look at music the same, like I'm not trying to practice technical perfection or whatever. It's more just constantly refining the things that I already know. You could say that every day I do ear training, and you could say that I work on my rhythm and single note playing and all that stuff every day, but I don't sit down with my cold brew and do that. I put on a James Brown record and I listen without my instrument, and I hear new subtleties and new ghost notes that I didn't hear before. So I guess that's ear training, but it's fun ear training rather than, intervallic ear training or whatever. Like I try and find ways, Moni, you're killing me, but I try and find, we do. I try and find ways to make it not feel like practicing so that it's just playing. And Victor Wooten had said something profound about it, and I don't even want to attempt to try and sort of say what he said, but a similar thing. Like, I don't practice. I just play all the time, I guess, like, with a blues musician, sorry, last thing to say, like, I mean, and I don't know the answer. Did Lightning Hopkins and Sunhouse practice every day? Or did they learn a few things from someone or figure out a few things and then just play them all the time and play them so much that nobody else could play them the way that they could, with the feel, with the touch, like a B.B. King? How about that? Like, people love to say 3 notes. Obviously, B.B. knows a lot more than 3. But that kind of ideology of like, does B.B. know, octatonic scale, Lydian flat 7? I don't know. But when he plays those notes that he plays, I feel them deeper than someone playing 60 notes, So I guess I'm always looking for those kinds of things in my own playing, whether it's scratching D7 or playing a single note or something,
No. So no transcribing Dragon Force for you.
No, but transcribing James Brown. Sure.
That's I love it.
Yeah.
So, okay. So one of the things is you've kind of blown up on Instagram in the last 6 to 7 months. I mean, it's been kind of amazing, and
it's kind of crazy. Yeah.
It has been unbelievable. And the thing that I think is really kind of connected with people is that the Instagram world, as far as guitar players and musicians, is very much show me what you got chops wise.
Sure is.
The faster, the better, the crazier, the wilder stuff, or it's kind of veers the other way, which is kind of like memes and like, oh, what happens if Tom Morello plays with Guns N' Roses or something like that, right?
Sure.
And I think that's why you've, like we've said in the intro, you've attracted the attention of these like musicians, John Mayer, Bootsy Collins, Phoebe Bridgers.
Yeah.
And so it's because you are doing the rhythm thing, You're doing it in such a way that people feel it, even through an Instagram clip, which is unbelievable. I think that's the hardest way. We love Mooney. We do love Mooney here at the
I told you
podcast.
at the beginning of the interview, I was like, he's the boss. You're going to have to deal with whatever mood he's in.
I love it. So, how does one practice rhythm and get better at rhythm?
I mean, there's a lot of different ways. I think what I do mostly, people always want to know if I practice with a metronome, for example. Most of what I do is playing along to drum loops, drum machines, just recorded music that just hits me in the chest and moves me. Um, I go into this a lot, like in Patreon videos, especially. There's a lot of different ways. I might listen to a Tribe Called Quest and try and come up with guitar parts that don't exist that sound like they would be a sample. And I don't mean me, trying to blow over a beat and impress you with a bunch of shit. I mean, what's something that I could play that literally sounds like Q-Tip sampled me and I'm inside of the music. So I'll practice things like that. I will go after an individual element of the drums. Like I might go after the hi-hat and just tap the hi-hat on the guitar. And then like with ghost notes, dead strokes, and then eventually come up with a rhythm or whatever. So I guess what I'm trying to say really is that I look at the guitar as pitched percussion. It is truly a drum to me. It's not a guitar. I don't necessarily look at it like this legato, sonorous singing instrument that's supposed to sustain and be lyrical. It can be, and how wonderful that it is, but it's like a drum to me, and I hit it like a drum. And I mean, I guess as a tip, which I could give is a lot of what I'm doing is playing drum beats on the guitar, and I'm just muting with my left hand. I'm not adding my left hand in because I don't feel like I've earned the right to add the left hand in until the drums feel good and there's a rhythm. And when it starts here, or, if you're lefty or righty, you get what I'm saying, the picking hand, when it feels good here, then I've earned the right to add this in, And I think that that's a problem with a lot of people's rhythm is that they just go after biting off more than they can chew and trying to grab all these things. And like when you play drums, like you have to know how to evenly hit the hat. You have to know how to make the kick and the hi-hat line up first to align before you can, flam them or whatever. So there's like lots of individual touches for me on the guitar and splitting the guitar into zones and thinking about the kick drums here and the hats are here and there's bongos or congas in the middle. Yeah.
So how would one, I guess, like, what would be the thing to practice then? Like just finding drum loops and just going over them and trying to come up with parts?
Yeah, basically. I mean, I'll put on a drum loop and just literally play the drums, I'll just find it and just start playing it on the drums. I mean, on the guitar. I'll literally play the drum beat on the guitar. And then I'll start to add in, subdivisions and syncopations and, letting notes bleed through or whatever. But it's just drums. I'm just playing drums on the guitar. That's all I'm doing.
So, like we mentioned before, you've played with all sorts of people. Jay-Z, Erykah Badu, Queen Latifah. I mean, if anyone wants to go to Ella's website and just look at the list, it's phenomenal. It's crazy. So one thing I'm really curious about is you've played with all sorts of artists. What does a good rehearsal look like, and what does a bad rehearsal look like with these artists?
A bad rehearsal looks like people not showing up on time, not learning the music, and this sort of goes into a bad band, not just a rehearsal, an unwillingness to respect each other and to serve the music, having an ego and just, letting everyone know how bad you are, how killing you are by your gospel chop fills or your, drop two wiggly woo minor nine voicings that you're trying to impress someone, or your reharms on the keys or whatever. There's a time and a place for all of that. But I'd say that's a bad rehearsal, when people just aren't listening and communicating, and they're not there to help the music and the artist. They're there to let people know, who they are as a musician and how bad they are. That's a bad rehearsal. I mean, a good one is the opposite of that, just people showing up on time or early, learning the music, just being prepared, listening, just having a good attitude to serve the song and, back up the artist. Like the D'Angelo touring band from the 2000s, they were called D'Angelo and the Soultronics. And that's when it was Questlove and Pino Palladino and Spanky. I could list the whole band, but that was, the tightest, if not one of the tightest, the tightest, in my opinion, touring bands. In addition to a James Brown, I know everybody's frothing at the mouth to let me know other bands they think are tight. But to me, that band just, you could listen to any show. Nobody overplayed. It was just the groove and music. And it was so wildly funky. It makes you like feral, To me, that's the kind of music that I want to play. I want to be the kind of musician that can go 5 million miles an hour, but chooses to roll the window down and just go 30 like this. I don't need to let you know I can, burn the wheels off, unless it's time to go there. And that also gets into, I've talked about this before, but musical generosity, and not just in teaching, but by generously giving other people space to bloom, in a certain part in the song or whatever. And just musical maturity, to play the parts. If you ask a lot of seasoned older musicians, they'll kind of, what do I need to do to make it, and blah, blah, blah. They'll say, show up on time. Matter of fact, no, show up early, learn the music, be a really good hang, and, and don't have an ego, play the parts. Most people are going to tell you stuff like that. That's what I'll tell you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then what do you think is when someone goes into rehearsal, what are the optimal conditions for you, as far as because it sounds like you've talked about, you've been thrown into situations like the Queen Latifah gig and other stuff. What does optimal prep look like for you for a touring gig?
I guess enough time with the music to figure out, do I have to build patches? What am I using for pedals, guitars, gear? Enough time to really think about that. And it's a lot more complex than you may think, because it may be I'm going to Europe and we don't have a guitar tech, so I'm responsible to carry everything. So do I want to carry, an Anvil flight case pedal board? Or do I want to put, a Kemper or a Line 6 in my backpack and go that way? So there's preparation in terms of things like that. So there's the gear programming aspect, I'd say. Spending a lot of time with the music and engaging with it and really thinking about things. Sometimes there's no guitar in the music and you have to make decisions. Where do I go? Do I double a keyboard player? Do I lay out for the first verse? Do I do sound effects? Do I just play rhythm and stay in the cut? Do I double the bass player? A lot of stuff, especially all my years touring in Erykah Badu's band, there wasn't a lot of guitar on the records. So I constantly had to make decisions. you know. So just the prep in order to have enough time for things like that. But I got to be honest with you, I've had plenty of scenarios where there's been no rehearsal and no prep. And I've just had to figure it out on the spot, period. And it's been some of the deepest musical experiences. My first gig with Erykah was live, this program called VH1 Soul Stage. And it was 2008. The band had been together. They were in Nairobi, I think. And they were coming back. I had never played with them in my life. I wasn't sent a set list. I knew some of Erykah's music, so I listened to a lot, but I didn't know if things were in different keys, segues, remixes. And I got live on stage, and it was a lot. It was like like an MTV Unplugged. And there's this tune called Annie, like Annie Don't Wear No Panties.
Oh, I know that video. I know that. That's the famous one, right?
Yeah, that's me on guitar. She called that tune out, and I remember she said like something like, like something about like that's that funk or something. And I put my guitar up to my ear, like what, sorry, I was almost about to swear. I was like, what key are we in? I think it was C or D flat or something. Okay, let's go. And I mean, I'm really proud because I thought like I came up with some amazing parts, but it was completely in the moment. It wasn't rehearsed. It just was you are thrown in the fire, and what are you going to do right now in this moment? So sometimes moments like that are just so beautiful and memorable because you're not overthinking things. It's just it's forcing you to really listen because you don't know what's going to happen next. Yeah.
I had no idea about that. That's the famous one where she's wearing the tight red shirt, right? And she has the big afro.
That was my first gig with her ever. Yeah, it was
that's wild.
2008. Yeah.
I watched that when it was on TV.
Yeah, that's me.
That's so crazy.
Yeah.
God, I can't imagine that pressure.
Yeah.
Did you feel pressure at all? Like when I'd be losing my mind.
I was excited more than anything. We like did it somewhere in Brooklyn, and I've always admired Erykah. If I could just give her flowers for a second. I mean, and it's funny, I didn't even say this. My friend Michelle Indeggiocello said this, but she's like, Erykah's the antidote. She's like, Erykah's like not even the artist. She's like, she is the art. Like she's just art. And I just thought that was such a brilliant way that Michelle described it. She's just art. I mean, she's just this, I don't know, this force, this musical force as a a person, a musician, an artist, or whatever. I've always admired her. So I was just so excited to play. And I remember when I was on tour with Queen Latifah, they would Erykah's band would go on after us, and I would watch every show. I just wanted to be in that band more than anything in the world, and my dream came true. Because it's kind of like, this is a really weird description, but it's kind of like an R&B jam band, just in the sense that there's a lot of like vamps, like James Brown. You don't know what tune she's going to call, things are really tight, but they're also just like laid back, and you're just kind of listening, and there's no Pro Tools playback where you're playing over pre-recorded tracks. It's 100% live and in the moment. And it's my favorite band I've ever played in to this date.
What was Erykah Badu like as a band leader?
So fun. I mean, what was really cool about her, she was almost like a Miles Davis or something. Like she just wanted the musicians to be themselves. And I would like reinvent myself. One tour, I was kind of on some like Jeff Lee Johnson, just doing a lot of like distortion with heavy chorus and, some really angular intervals. And for those that don't know the guitar player, Jeff Lee Johnson, check him out. He's passed, but he was a Philly legend. So, I'd be on something like that. other tours, I just really want to lock in with the rhythm and be on some more, almost more Wah Wah Watson meets James Brown. Just really like, not sound effecty, but just locked in with the bass and the drums. And she, I don't know, I don't want to compliment myself, but I know that she values what I do in her music, and she values, the musicians in her band, and just like Miles did, just let people be themselves. Erykah's not like it needs to be 100% like the record, and where's that sound from? It's like jazz, just in the sense that it's a moment in time and it'll never be the same again. Not to say that we don't play the same song, but yeah, she just, and speaking of, unprepared musical situations, last summer I was in Nashville, and I was working with the orchestra, and they were on tour, and they were playing the arena in Nashville. And she texts me and she's like, "Sweetie, do you want to come play the arena with us tonight?" And I was like, "Erykah, I don't have a guitar pick, pedals, and amp." I'm like, I haven't played your show. Like, I don't even know the show anymore. And I'm just like, what time do I need to be there? And I just showed up. It was kind of a flex, but I put a message on Instagram, and I'm like, "Badu asked me to play this arena. Can I borrow someone's guitar and pedals?" And my friend RJ, who's, an amazing person and a guitar player, showed up at the studio. We had no sound check, no line check. And I literally got up in front of an arena full of people and played an Erykah Badu show, not having played with her in years, not knowing if there were any transitions, and just, it was like my first show playing with her, just listening. Now, she rehearses. I'm not saying she's not prepared by any means. I mean, when we would go on tour, like, we would rehearse in Dallas for a couple of weeks. But that was like another moment where I'm just listening and, and getting in where I fit in.
So I've never really played with a band in the sense of like that jams that much, if that makes sense. Because I mostly come from rock, indie, punk, and that's very like, you play your part, you play it tight, let's go, let's do it, right? And so what do rehearsals look like in a more like, I don't want to say improv, but like, I guess flow? I know it's kind of a weird word to use here, but that kind of music, what does a rehearsal look like with that kind of style of music, as opposed to, say, like, if I'm playing, I played in a Police cover band for a little bit. Like, I had to play those parts, right? And those parts are what I have to play. What is the difference between those kind of rehearsals?
Well, you have to understand, like, Erykah's stuff. I mean, we are playing records. We're playing her songs. So it's not just like freeform, Spinal Tap, freeform jazz exploration odyssey. It's not Fish Gamehenge or anything, I mean, it's a lot of just playing the tune, but she might be like, "I want to remix it. Let's do something different," And so we would just groove and come up with stuff. I remember I came up with an arrangement. She had a song. I forget if it was Kiss Me or Booty, but it was one of them. And, I started playing this wah-wah part, this rhythm that made it into quartet, like that, and so the whole arrangement changed just because I was purposely putting the wah-wah scratches on the backbeat instead of I was just doing it just turned into, and the whole groove changed, so there's a lot of just vibing, just grooving on stuff and just seeing where it leads, But other than that, yeah, I mean, we're rehearsing the songs,
Now, a lot of you might know Rhinestone just for our podcast, and that's awesome. We love our podcast. They're doing really well. But one thing that Rhinestone also does is we have a virtual music studio where we help artists take their songs from bedroom demos to completed master works. And we help them out by having our team of 25 musicians, engineers, and producers who help craft perfect songs. We take songs that literally can be recorded on an iPad. We had one artist record it on an iPad and then turn it into an incredible song with the help of strings, horns, real drums, great bass playing, and all sorts of other stuff. And so a lot of people, they have day jobs. They have, we work with doctors, we work with lawyers who maybe they don't have enough time to go have band practice, but they have enough time to put a song together. And maybe they don't have time to arrange recording sessions and check out all this stuff. And Rhinestone takes care of a lot of that. We help artists all the time save time and get high quality musicians with every turn. And what our virtual studio has been able to do has been phenomenal. We've helped artists land Spotify placements. We've done TV show theme songs. We've done all sorts of different things, and all from the comfort of home for a lot of artists where maybe they don't have the opportunity or the connections to really take it further. So if this sounds like something you'd be interested in, I would love for you guys to email me the word virtual studio at rhinestonemusic@gmail.com. That is RHYNESTONE music@gmail.com. And we will hook you up with a special deal that is exclusive for our podcast listeners. And I would love to get to know and see what we can do to help your music get to that next level. So, all right, so we're going to take a complete left turn here. So I'm going to play Simpleton here because I actually don't know entirely what this is. And I want to dive in because I think it's fascinating. And from what I understand, this is like where most of your bread comes from. What is an orchestrator?
It's a good question. The craft has changed a lot over the years, but the simplest way to articulate it is I make the music playable for musicians to sight read. Obviously, I'll expand on that, but so for a lot of film and video game, it's not, John Williams sitting at the piano with a furrowed brow, scribbling on manuscript and handing it to a copyist. It's in today's day and age. I mean, I wish it was, but in today's day and age, it's people composing in a DAW and using MIDI, using a Contact or Spitfire library with epic horns and, strings and whatever, and fully realizing a composition. Now that composition needs to get performed by real musicians, and you can't just spit out, a piano roll for an oboe player. They don't read piano roll. You know what I mean? So that music needs to be transcribed in the sense of not necessarily an aural takedown, but receiving a general MIDI file, opening it up in a DAW and going, okay, well, I see that, duh, 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 duh. They look like 32nd or 64th notes. Well, clearly they're not. Those are eighth notes with staccato dots. So let me, scrub and clean that duration. So you get into a sketch form where the orchestrator can then take that and actually take that sort of charcoal or black and white thing and color it and frame it, And there's a lot of different things that go into the craft, and it depends who you work for. So, for example, there might be a composer I work for that's do not tamper with my music. Just get the right dynamics in and articulation and phrasing and make sure that cello note goes to the cello. And you're almost like a copyist at that point, There's other composers where it's like, this is what I want, but if I say blue, feel free to make it seafoam green or whatever, so to speak, where you can change colors and you're not adding counter lines and changing the music, but you're just coloring it in a different way. So yeah, that's mostly what I do as an orchestrator.
So what does the day-to-day work of an orchestrator look like? I mean, that seems like a very, is it just, do composers reach out to you and say, hey, I want this by Friday, make it happen? I mean, is there a workflow to it? Is it contract work? How does it work?
Every job's completely different. I mean, there's stuff I did like Ariana Grande's Grammy performance, which was 2020, and her Coachella performance. And like that, we had a little bit of lead time, not a ton, but like a little bit, when I work for Bungie and I work on Destiny, there's a lot lead time. I mean, there's still a punishing amount of music to get through, but maybe we have a month lead time, month and a half, 2 months or something. Before you start the job, you just know the parameters of the job. Okay, we're going to be writing for 6 French horns and this, and so you know exactly whom you're writing for. When they need the music by, when the parts need to be delivered to the librarian in Nashville or whatever. So it's definitely not rock and roll. It's like, this is fine line drawing. Yeah.
And I mean, how did you get into this field? I mean, it seems like closed. You said you dropped out of Berkeley after a year. This seems very strict and very like on like there's a lot of rules, and obviously the music is very specific as far as what how it's written and dynamics and things like that. And it's also kind of a polar opposite to what you were doing as a funk guitar player.
It is. Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. Yeah.
So how did you break into this field?
Well, I was producing records, and I always just loved the alchemy of like combining sounds, whether it was like a pump organ with an alto flute or something. And oh wow, the alto flute brings out more harmonics of the pump organ or whatever, just this sound world combination thing. So that always intrigued me, even though I didn't think like an orchestrator. That was like the germ of things. I remember being on the road with Badu and other tours, especially like I remember one European tour with Erykah, and we were in France. I just remember sort of seeing the writing on the wall for myself, like, I'm not really comfortable being on the road anymore. I want to get off of the road, but I still want to be a musician. And I remember we were in Lyon, and I bought Debussy La Mer, and I bought maybe Ravel String Quartet or something. And
is that the music, or was that the sheet music?
The sheet music, sorry. Yeah, the score, like a pocket score. And just staring at it. So, I mean, in a way, it is similar to guitar in that I'm listening and I'm looking, and I don't know what I'm looking at. It looks like Chinese or Greek to me. I wasn't really good at reading music back then, especially not, bass clarinet in A or French horn, or, everything's transposing. So I looked at it very sort of primally, like, here's a note and there's these 3 slashes. And when I see the slash, I notice that there's like a blur of sound. Oh, those 3 slashes mean a string tremolo or something. So it was almost like hieroglyphics. I would like slowly, be in the bunk driving through France or Italy or whatever. It's like very romantic, actually, and engaging the music that way. And then I left LA. I got off the road. I moved to Western Massachusetts, to the mountains, which is where I live now. And I guess you could say I did my 10,000 hours. I bought a ton of Ravel scores and just poured over the pages and taught myself, how to read music. And then eventually I found a teacher. His name's Alan Belkin, a wonderful man and teacher. And at the time he was teaching at the University of Montreal. And I would take like online Skype lessons with him back then. And then that led to me getting my first gig, which was the lead orchestrator for Destiny, which was a crazy like first gig to get. And then at that time, I met a guy named Conrad Pope, who turned out to be like my real mentor in orchestration. And Conrad orchestrated for everyone. I mean, literally everyone, everything. John Williams and James Newton Howard and Hans Zimmer and Alan Silvestri and all the, the Alexandre Desplat, just all everything from Star Wars and the Lord of the Rings trilogy and Harry Potter, just everything. So he really helped me navigate through a lot of things. So I also just had a lot of just great mentors, great people to just help me, you know. But I think the most important thing is I just had the drive to learn. So that's sort of how that came about.
So, I mean, I'll be honest. I wasn't a video gamer at all, but my younger brother is, and I told him you were coming on, and he was asking about like, oh, what I know her from anything, and I was like, oh, well, I know you're a gamer, like, she did these things for this Destiny video game, and my brother was like, what? Like, my brother lit up like crazy, right? And so I didn't realize how big of a deal this was. This game is. I mean, they're massive games. And so, how do you go from just taking lessons to being the lead orchestrator on this like massive video game series? I mean, that seems like a bit of chance, a bit of luck. I mean, was it a recommendation? How did that fall into your lap?
All of those things, you know. Again, I had sort of done my 10,000 hours with study. Um, I was orchestrating a symphonic piece for a friend of mine, and it was sort of like a Lord of the Rings, and it was like a massive orchestra, like, Mahler sized. And I mean, I was working on that orchestration for months and months, and I had posted a couple of snippets. I don't know where, Facebook, Instagram, or something. And a guy named Sky Lewin that I went to college with um, responded to one of them. He's like, "You orchestrate?" And I was like, "Yeah, I've been kind of all I've been doing for a while." And he's like, "Oh, well, I work for a video game company. Would you want to audition?" I said, "Sure." And they sent me some music, and I orchestrated it. I had no idea what Destiny was. I hadn't played a video game since NES in the 80s or something. So I didn't go into it with fear. I just was like, there wasn't an arrogance. It was just like, I don't know what this is, but I'll do the best that I can do. And I got the job, and my friend was like, that's like a huge AAA video game. It's like, it is. And, I'll be honest with you, in the beginning, I wasn't really prepared, and I don't mean like I wasn't good enough to have the job. I was used to concert acoustic orchestration, which is incredibly different than film and video game. Like, you're typically not receiving a MIDI file to orchestrate from. You're typically receiving like the composer's sketch. And in acoustic orchestration, there are laws, so to speak. Like, you're not going to put a flute on middle C and a trumpet on middle C, because the trumpet is going to obliterate the flute. So you just know acoustic principles. Well, if you want the flute to be heard, it goes up an octave or 2 octaves. That everybody gets placed into a register where they can be heard. Excuse me, my voice is shot. But in video game and film, a lot of those rules go out the window, because you're striping things and you're recording every section separately, and you have a mixing console. So suddenly an alto flute can be as loud as a trumpet. So there were certain things I had to unlearn and write my own rule book for. And it took a couple of years to kind of get used to some of those things. Yeah.
I think that's awesome. I think it's just, one of the things I'm seeing with your career has just been like, you just said, I guess we're going for this. You just showed up and you tried your best, and then they hired you, and people get impressed. I mean, it seems like, there's that Steven Spielberg quote, which I talk about with people all the time when I do consults, which is, directing, the hardest part about directing is getting out of the car and walking to the studio. He's like, after that, I know I can do the job, but it's like, it's that fear of, can I do this? The self-doubt. So as soon as I can beat the self-doubt, I know I get in there and start doing the work. And that seems to be like a pretty common thread through your story.
Somewhat. I mean, I appreciate you saying that. I definitely have had plenty of experiences where I'm like trying to over prepare and panicking. And it's not all as like laid back as it seems. Some of it is, some of it is just it is what it is, and I don't know any better, and I'm just going to give it my all. And some of it is like imposter syndrome and like over preparing, and I just come to learn that the over preparing stuff it was limiting me and not allowing me to be in the moment.
How do you catch yourself from over preparing?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know if I have an answer, but the first thing that comes to mind is, and again, I have to bring up like, who I am. Like before I transitioned, I was an incredibly anxious person and wanted to over prepare. And now I just have this feeling like, Ella, it's going to be okay. You're going to be okay. And so I don't feel the need to over prepare and come up with every imaginary scenario and stuff like that. Specifically with orchestration, if I try something that's a little bit different than what I'm used to doing, then I'll prepare myself by having a solution if what I do doesn't work. For instance, we've got 6 horns and I put, 3 of them in a fiber mute and 3 of them are open. And the composer's like, I hate that sound. So then I just know, oh, well, it's pianissimo. Okay, so then they're all going to go into a fiber mute. Or like, okay, we'll take the mutes out. It's a more strident sound or whatever. So I always kind of have a little bit of a exit strategy, I mean, I suppose as an orchestrator, it is your job in a sense to anticipate everything that can go wrong. Because you do have like literally an entire symphony looking at you, the orchestrator, like what note is that? Is that the right note? I mean, as an orchestrator, every 2 seconds, it's just like, Ella, page 23, trombone 3, are they still in a bucket mute there? Or are they out? Hang on a sec. I mean, you're always on. But again, you just, the more you do it, you just have that, it's going to be okay. And, people are rooting for you. And if you don't know something, just say you don't know, it's going to be okay. That's kind of my way of sort of telling myself and that I don't need to over prepare.
So your work as a classical based orchestrator seems directly opposite of your work as a funk guitar player.
Yeah.
Is there anything you've learned from one that has informed how you do the other?
Oh, sure. I mean, yeah. So let's say with guitar, like James Brown, for example, studying those guitar parts where it's like boom, so maybe that's played by one guitar. It's actually not. You could play it by one guitar, but I learned like ways of breaking up lines in James Brown that I would sort of take that into the orchestra and ways of breaking things out and realizing that sometimes when I break things out a little bit more, meaning giving it to multiple people and spreading that musical gesture around, that it energizes the music more or it makes it more colorful. Because if it's the brass, maybe the tube is going boom and the horns are going da da da, and then the trumpets are going da 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 dee da 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 boom da 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 da. So you've just created this orchestration where in James Brown it might be one cat just playing the thing. Do you know what I mean? So the funk and the feel, I guess, of guitar, some of the voicings on guitar, as you know, it's not piano. Like, guitar doesn't really want to play E minor 7 like this. You can, but it's not fun. This is a close position. 1, flat 3, 5, whatever, flat 7. Guitar wants to play this. because it's way more comfortable. So this is a lot more like a woodwind voicing or something. I mean, yes, this is completely playable by a woodwind, but there's just certain voicings in guitar that are a lot more friendly for woodwinds because things are a little more openly spaced, where this kind of, or, those kinds of voicings, which aren't necessarily super comfortable, sound great in, four French horns or something like that. So certain voicings, definitely from guitar. I would say from orchestra to guitar, a lot of the gestures that exist in classical music and in the classical orchestra. So, like, for example, if I were to play like a 2-5-1, right? And now we're thinking like a guitar player, so, right. But orchestration, if I'm thinking like a harp and a harp gliss, it's going to be more, so it's kind of like trying to mimic what the orchestra is doing on the guitar, or just how the orchestra has certain, violins trilling these kind of, little trills and these little, just, where that would be like a long glissandi. So it's sort of like special effects and things like that. And just literally thinking like the orchestra, like just I'm hearing a bassoon and I'm going to try and evoke the staccato like nature of a bassoon, or like the warmth of a French horn. So I'll play closer here with my thumb. So you're just thinking orchestrally, even, and this is what sort of frustrates me because people are like, doesn't sound like a bassoon. It's like, that's not the point. The point is to think like the orchestra and evoke these things, rather than thinking like a guitar player, I guess.
So now, again, like we said, these are two completely polar opposite worlds on paper. How important is it to be deeply involved in both worlds? It seems like one would just wear you out from not doing the other. I mean, do you just find so much joy in both of these worlds? Do you keep them separate? Do they blend into each other? Or do you think of it all as just music at the end of the day? I feel like they just require such different headspaces.
They do. Yeah, that's a great question. It is all music, but I tend to be very like a little more white collar with orchestration, not like, being snooty, but just crossing my I and dotting my T's and just making sure that, every note is accounted for and being more thorough. When it comes to guitar, it's a lot more just instinctual and guttural and just a feeling and not over analyzing things. So I would say, they're different mindsets, but at the end of the day, I mean, I'm trying to evoke a good feel and color and a sonic thumbprint, something that has its own sound. And I'd say anything that I touch musically, there's a complexity to it, but it's not complicated. Like Ravel had a saying,
What does that mean though? What does that what does that mean?
Well, you could say like complex, meaning that it's like a small canvas with a lot of little intentional brushstrokes. It's not cacophonous. It's not, confusing. It's just detailed. So, I mean, I don't know. I'll pick up my guitar, so if I'm talking about, my amp isn't on, but if I'm talking about James Brown, so if I play a line like give it up or turn it loose, and I'm going to play this not in good time and not with any ghost strokes. The notes are really just, and so, but with all the ghost strokes, Sorry, my ring. Let me take my ring off. It's not hard. The notes just. What's complex is all this. And that I'm not going, but I'm also not going, but that there's an in between. Here it's going ding, da, do, da, do, da. It's not da, 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 and it's not da, da. It's like, and it's, so there are all these different, this would sound way better going through an amp, but there's all these different durations in the notes and the ghost note and how hard I'm pressing in the in-between notes. When I get off of the note, I'm very conscious about how long I'm playing the note. Am I starting on an upstroke, a downstroke? So that's what I mean about complex, but not complicated. This is not necessarily complicated to play, but it is highly complex within the touch and the feel and the articulation of it. And I guess that's what I feel like I just either instinctually do or strive for in guitar and in orchestration, that there are little brushstrokes and they're not distorting your vision of what needs to be there. But if they were gone, you'd be like, oh, something sounds just different, you know? I mean, I think that comes across in my teaching that, you know, that I know you've seen my videos, that there's a lot of just subtleties, lots of little, like, you know, I taught a David T. Walker thing today, and like, sure, it's a harp sort of thing, but like part of the sound is gripping the pick so lightly that there's a certain sound scrape that comes through on the strings. Like that to me is a complexity. It's a very fine detail. It's not just holding the pick. You know, I think those are the things that make the music just come alive.
So you won a Grammy playing with Silk Sonic, which was a collaboration from a few years ago between Bruno Mars and Anderson .Paak. How did that project come about with your involvement? And what were the sessions like?
Well, I met Bruno, 15 years ago or something. I mean, right when he started to blow up. He actually like beat my ass in Nintendo Wii. We were playing tennis, Nintendo Wii. And yeah, we talked about doing something way back then. And then my best friend has been his engineer for many, many years. And what was cool is that I never asked him to do a session and he never asked me. It just organically happened after about a decade. You know, Bruno was hearing about me a lot. And it started with him just calling me and being like, hey, what guitar tone do you think that is on this, whatever, Rick James record? You know, what sound is that on this Bootsy record? You know, whatever. So it started with just like a lot of questions, and I love that stuff. I live for that, you know, those details, complexities. And so I, yeah, just would answer things and kind of try and share what I know with him. And one day he just said, you know, there was a particular song. I didn't know what the project was. He didn't say it's called Silk Sonic. And, you know, it was just like, hey, there's this thing, like, what would you do on this? I'm like, I probably do this and this. And he's just like, do you want to just play on the song? And I knew he had a reputation for never sending out music. You know what I mean? And so this was remote. And I said, yeah, sure, you know. And so it started that way, just very, very organically. And then that led to working on the album for, I guess, I don't know, about a year, off and on. Yeah, I'm very proud of the record. I've got the certificate and the whatever multi-platinum plaque up there, and it means a lot to me. Not just for like an accomplishment, but I mean it was the first credit as Ella Feingold since transitioning. that meant a lot to me. I literally transitioned during the making of the album. I mean, I literally started as one person and ended as another. So that means a lot to me. Sort of just, it's like a timestamp, in life. And I've said this before, but I feel like, as a session musician, you get called upon to do a lot of things, wear a lot of hats, play a lot of different music. And sometimes you just kind of feel like, oh, the music's not reaching me, or like, yeah, I'm a good call, but like, it's not really my wheelhouse. I can get the job done. And this, I just felt like I belonged in the music. I didn't write the music, but I lived that music. That's, Philly soul and Motown. And I'm not saying it sounded like Motown, but just I lived that era of music. And so I had an understanding of what they were going for, the type of parts and sounds and tones and everything. So, yeah.
So I want to make sure I got this clear. You did all this work remotely. This was
Yes.
Not like you guys got in the studio. Okay. So what were the kind of
they did, but I cut everything remotely.
Okay. So they cut everything live in a studio and then they sent you. Okay. Yeah. Where is it pretty close to the finished product when you got it? Was it rough stems? Was it a stereo track?
Like Leave the Door Open was like, I think like piano MIDI. There were no drums. There were no vocals. Other ones were fleshed out with vocals. Other ones, there were no vocals. Some had stems. Some was just a 2-mix. Yeah.
And then were there any like instructions from Bruno or Anderson about these records? I mean, was it like do whatever you want? Was it like just it just feels like it's such a important stylistic record of the last decade, right? Like it's a cornerstone. People know where they were when they heard that record. I mean, Leave the Door Open has over 1 billion streams. I mean, it's a monumental record. I can't imagine Bruno or Anderson .Paak being able to like let you have free reign, but I mean, what was their input in it? I mean, were they send you back a list like, oh, we don't like this, we want more of this, or I mean, how many drafts were you doing? What was the workflow like?
I actually never talked with Anderson about it. I only talked to Bruno. I never talked to Andy. I mean, we follow each other on Instagram, but I didn't know he was even involved in it. I didn't know it was still called Silk Sonic. I thought I was working on, I don't know what, a Bruno Mars album or something, or something he was producing. No, I mean, he would be like, oh, I'm thinking, Ernie Isley here. Oh, can you give me some acoustic strums here? Take a solo here. Give me that like candy. Can you give me some candy? I call it candy, just like when I do sound effects or transition sounds or whatever. So, sometimes it would be like, hey, can you replay this with a better feel or tone or whatever? So he would give instruction, and then I would just interpret. I mean, sometimes I would literally give him what he wanted. Sometimes he would say something, and this isn't meant to sound condescending, but I'd be like, I know you said Ernie Isley, but in my head, I know what you actually mean is this. You know what I mean? And a lot of what I do as an orchestrator and as a session musician, I feel like is like playing the game of guess my favorite color, So, and again, that's not a discredit to any artist I've ever worked for. It's just sometimes you might have a more refined reference where you say to someone, oh, I need some rock shit. Give me some Jimi Hendrix. But what you actually mean is, I don't know, Gary Moore or Nuno Betancourt or whatever. Like you mean rock, but you mean a little more of this kind of thing. And sometimes you just know, like, just replay the thing or give them some options or, every song is a little bit different in terms of what it needs and what you're told to do. And, I just view what I do as I'm there to help. So I certainly always want to have the attitude of helping and never like, wait till they get a load of this. Like, I know they told me to do this, but wait till they get a load of this. Like, it's like more the attitude of, I'm going to do what you asked of me, and maybe 7% of wait till they get a load of this. And just, just a little bit like, here's a couple of sound effects if you want them, or, here's a track of licks if you want to pepper them in. Like that. That's what I mean by it.
Okay, so I have to ask: is that little in the beginning of "Leave the Door Open"? Is that you? Is that you?
Yeah, that's me. Yeah.
How did you
Yeah,
How did you
it's
get that
just,
sound?
well, it was an L5, and it was an Echoplex, a real tape echo, and a Maestro phase shifter. It was a Fender Blues Junior, I think, and some reverb, an EMT plate, and just doing this little. And obviously all of the effects, make it come together. That effect, I didn't create that. I mean, I literally played it on the record, but that came from a gentleman named Dennis Coffey, who played in Motown, and he would do that kind of stuff with like the dramatics. Like there's a song called In the Rain. This is, kids, this is why it's important to study your records. So it came from him. And then after Dennis, there was a guy named Wah Watson. And Wah Wah is the one I think most people attribute that to. But Dennis, did it first. And that's sort of where that inspiration came from. And it also works perfectly for the song because it does sort of evoke a door opening, So, yeah.
And then the other one I have to ask about is: did you do anything on "Fly As Me"? Because I think that's that's probably the most creative.
No, I didn't, but I did tell Bruno what pedal to buy for it, which was a fuzz tone. Yeah, no, that's not me. I'm almost positive that's either Bruno or D Mile playing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Are there any other guitar parts on the record that you're very proud of?
I mean, I'm proud of all of them. I played on the introduction, Leave the Door Open, Love's Train, After Last Night, Smoking Out the Window. I mean, I'm proud of all of them, Yeah.
Yeah, it's just such a cool experience. I mean, that's such a critically acclaimed record. Like especially when you consider where pop music is at, to have something with crazy chords and harmonies and orchestration and attitude and still be fun and feel good.
That's exactly what I liked about it. And I liked that you could tell it was like influenced by maybe Philadelphia in 1973 or something, but it wasn't aged. The music wasn't aged in a way that, like with an Amy Winehouse, and I'm not saying this is a bad thing, but like it wasn't trying to sound sonically like set 1973. Like it sounded like 1973 because of the brilliant songwriting, and the energy and the feel. But it was almost more like you found a reel from 1973 and put it into Pro Tools. Like it sonically sounded very clean. It wasn't, you know what I'm talking about, vinyl crackle and like just an echo chamber just covering the entire, thing or whatever. And I love those productions too. But I think that also helped it feel a little more modern and classic at the same time.
Yeah, so it's we at Rhinestone we talk about this a lot, where it's like you need to feel like those records, but it needs to have modern recording techniques, because otherwise it's not going to get played on the radio. It's not going to get put on Spotify playlists or things like that, because it's just when you record it in that way with that. If you try to recreate that sound, you end up sounding very dated, if that makes sense. I mean, sometimes that works, but it very rarely it does, in my opinion. I feel like it's better to like take those techniques but update some of them with modern sounds, so that way you can get played across radio and stuff like that.
I honestly couldn't speak to that. I'm not in that. I don't know. My instinctual thought is you should just do whatever is right for the music. And if that means recording to, half inch and not touching Pro Tools, then do it. And if it means only using, modern plugins, then do that. I just think it's whatever, whatever it needs to be, I guess.
So, Ella, I want to be respectful of your time. I do have a few more things I would love to go in depth with you. But are you on any sort of time crunch or anything like that?
We've been talking a minute. Yeah, we can get through a couple more questions. Sure.
Okay. So, you have a very successful Patreon, where you kind of break down your rhythm and your funk guitar playing and stuff like that. What are some of the pitfalls most musicians make when approaching Patreon?
I honestly don't know. Nobody's ever really answered questions for me on Patreon. Like, I've just kind of had to figure it out myself. I'll be perfectly transparent with you. Like, I'm struggling. Now, I don't mean struggling trying to make it work, but like, I wonder, like, should I unpublish this tier? Should I create a new tier that's a higher priced thing? I'm not really sure. I mean, I'll be transparent. I make $2,000 a month for my Patreon. I think I have, I don't know, somewhere between 700 and 900 subscribers. I have a $5 tier and a $10 tier. Yeah. And I let kind of people tell me, like, hey, would you do this? I'll ask questions. Hey, I'm thinking of making a new tier for longer format lessons. If I did that, would anyone be interested? Hey, I'm thinking of selling a transcription to this thing. If I made a little store with individual transcriptions, would anyone be interested? So I kind of I don't pretend to know it all. I just sort of ask questions to the people that are supporting me and see, what they think.
Have you made any mistakes that you've had to recover from as far as like Patreon, or maybe not mistakes, but like misfootings?
I'd say in the very beginning, I looked at my Patreon. It was only $3 a month. And I just looked at it like, you're literally just going to be tipping me. That's what this is. That's how I looked at it. Because I'm like, I know that I'm giving you profound knowledge basically for free. And so the $3 a month is like just a, hey, L, like, thank you so much. But people were starting to get frustrated. Like, why am I paying you when I can get all of this for free on Instagram? And so it was we both had different expectations. Their expectation was they were getting custom content. My expectation was, this is just a place where you can tip me. Like, is what I'm offering you, is getting 30 guitar lessons for me a month for $3. Is that fair to you? But then I embraced it more and I started to make more exclusive, content, and started to build up a community and feel, I feel for the most part appreciated wherever, at least musically speaking. And so, yeah, I've just been building this thing, and it's been really cool. And I'm grateful to anyone that supports, my teaching, because it does help me survive. But no, I'm still sort of learning with it. Most of my friends that are successful, like in education and music, they sort of have like a Kajabi or a TrueFire course or their own website or something, and they're not really doing Patreon. So I don't really have someone to talk to in that realm. I can ask for advice on other things. Yeah.
Yeah, Patreon's a weird one because it is like versus a Kajabi or Spitfire. It is more like community. Like you're almost paying for the time of the person. Like you're paying to get their feedback or their Q&As and things like that. Whereas like Kajabi is like a course more or less. But I know all three of those can make a lot of money for people if they're good with it.
I'm not against doing a Kajabi or any of those things. The problem for me is that I literally just have like this. It's actually right here. This Sony, what is this, ZV-1 or ZV-E10. This is all I have when I shoot, and it's got a built-in mic and I have some lighting. I find with those courses, you got to hire a music transcriber. they want tab and transcription for everything, multi-camera, all this stuff. The production value needs to be incredibly high. I just don't have the resources to do those things. So that's what has prevented me from doing a course like that. And I do get asked a lot, but I just don't have the resources to do it. I would need somebody to say, we want to do a course with you. And I did actually just get approached by a really cool, I don't want to give it away, but just somebody that I would want to put a course out with hit me up. And it's not who you would expect. It's like a band. It's not like True Fire or something.
Oh, well, we're all waiting because I know a lot of people are be down to get involved in a course with you for sure.
I would love to do one. Yeah. Yeah.
So speaking about money here, what do you think are the most overrated and underrated revenue streams in the music industry for you?
God, I just don't know if I'm the right person to be answering this stuff because I undervalue myself. Overvalued, I would say, is like being an artist, and like trying to get a record deal. Or sorry, let me rephrase that. I don't mean being an artist, but trying to get a record deal and doing that. I think that's overrated. Underrated maybe is just education and having a Patreon. I mean, there's a world in which that you can get your Patreon to a point where it covers your monthly nut and it's not even your main thing. Like, yes, it can be your main thing and you can live off of it. And that's great if you do, but you can also pre-shoot a lot of content and just get it. So like, if I don't do anything this month, my bills are paid, but here I am also a teacher and an orchestrator and, I'm going on the road for 6 months. So all these other things are paying my bills. So Patreon, it's just like I think for all musicians, the name of the game is financial security. So I find that for me, Patreon's invaluable because it can provide a certain sense of security of knowing every month, roughly, what I would be making. And the more effort that I put into it, the more that I get out of it. And hopefully the students do too, or patrons.
Yeah, I think they're called patrons. That sounds right. We'll get the vernacular right one of these days. All right. So last question in our main question section here. Do you have any regrets on your musical journey? If so, what would you have done differently?
I mean, my first thought is no, because every decision led me to where I am today, like talking with you now. So I would say no, but if I had to nitpick, not worrying as much about trying to find a voice and just enjoying the moment and playing, enjoying the people that I was playing with in the moment, and just being in the moment more. I'd say is a regret. I guess I could have practiced rhythm a little bit more in the earlier days. Now that I think about it, this is truly what I want to say. I think a lot of us as musicians feel like we're not complete or competent musicians unless I can comp Brazilian and I can play over changes. I know how to get a good lead tone and shred. I'm a well-rounded musician, that you can do all of these things. And at least for me, I was taught you need to do all these things and be well-rounded. And in truth, I feel like I wasted a lot of time trying to go after things that didn't really speak to me. So for example, I love listening to jazz. I don't want to be a jazz musician. I love jazz harmony. I use it in every day and playing. I don't want to sit down with you and play all the things you are. I don't. I just don't. I don't mind listening to Bill Frisell play all the things you are or Miles, but it's not for me. But I felt this need that like, I'm not a real musician unless I can burn through changes. It's like, Ella, you're not a jazz musician. Why are you going to spend all this time chasing that? Like, go after the things that speak to you, that make you want to get out of bed every day, and go after those things. So I would say I believe in being specialized now. I don't believe in being a jack of all trades, because nobody's calling me because I can play a little bit of bossa nova. Like, they're calling me because Ella's going to write some great parts and the feel's going to be fucking amazing. That's why I'm getting called. They're not calling me because I've got a little Steve Vai in my back pocket and a little this and a little of that.
I love it. I don't think there's a better way to end that portion of the interview than that. I think that's really true, is just, again, like sticking to who you are and being yourself and musical generosity.
Yeah.
That's really great stuff.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
So I'm going to hit you up with a little bit of a rapid fire section of our interview. These are just first thought, best thought. Answer them as you feel. And I'm really curious to see your answers on some of these. So are you ready?
Sure. Yeah.
First question, the rapid fire. What is the last album that blew your mind?
D'Angelo Voodoo.
Okay. I mean, that's not. I think
it's not a current one.
I know. It's only 20 something years old now at this point, right?
Yeah, I'm picky. I mean, the ones that like I couldn't speak that moved me so deeply were like Jeff Buckley, Sketches for My Sweetheart the Drunk, D'Angelo Voodoo, the first two Fiona Apple albums, Tidal and When the Pawn. There's a lot of stuff I just love, but those like have shaped who I am as a musician, like profoundly.
Who is an artist that deserves more attention?
There's a guitar player. He's a friend of mine that I love. I'll probably say his name wrong, but Hale Dasta. Parisian guy. He plays, I don't know if you've ever seen him, he plays acoustic guitar. And he plays drums on the acoustic. And it's not like a gimmick. I mean, when he plays, it sounds like Jay Dilla learned how to play guitar.
Oh, is he the one that has all the stickers on the guitar?
Yeah.
The stickers. Okay, I've seen him. Yeah, he's great.
Yeah.
I love him. We'll throw a picture of him on the screen.
Cool. Yeah, I would say him. He's my favorite. Yeah.
If you lost all of your gear in a tragic house fire and had to start over with only $1,000, what would you get?
For just gear to be up and running, or a guitar?
Gear to be up and running.
Like a Squire Strat, an Epiphone, some sort of Epiphone with humbuckers, and then I don't even know what things cost these days, but some sort of interface I could afford. That way I'd have two different sounding guitars and an interface. Hopefully that would be under 1,000. I don't know.
I mean, it depends on the quality of those, I suppose. There's some cheap Squires and Epiphones.
Squire Affinity for $200 on Amazon.
That's about say, yeah, I think that's about right for like a really cheap Squire.
Yeah.
Do you really? Do you have one?
Yeah, my Telecaster that I play inverted tuning. It's a $200 Amazon guitar.
Oh, that's awesome. That's really cool. So you're actually using it.
I'm literally using it. Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
If a gig is going terribly, how do you recover?
In the moment on stage or after the gig is over?
In the moment.
It's a tough one to answer. I mean, if it's like a bigger band, like if it's not my group, if I'm playing in a band, I'd say playing less and leaving more space, for them to hopefully listen to each other and try to uncomplicate things. If it's my own music, I might tell people to like go take a break or sit out or play quieter, so there's more dynamics.
Who is a guitar player that you look up to?
Well, I would say my friend again, I think he's, Hale Dasta. He's I hope I'm not saying his name wrong. Maybe the H is silent because he's French. I should ask him today how to say it, because it has all the accent aigu, all this stuff. He's the only guitar player I've heard in the last, I don't know how many years, where like I'm afraid of him. You know what I mean? And him and I are both feel players. I'm way more terrified of a musician that feels so good than someone who's technically fancy and does all this shit, because it's feel at the end of the day. Like if you can blow me away by just going bip, 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 that's so much more impressive than doing all this stuff. And when he plays, it just hits me in the chest. Yeah, I'm just like, and him and I will shed together on WhatsApp and send messages back and forth. And every time he sends me something, I'm like, how much? Like, I feel like a child. I'm just like, I don't know what to play after that.
And then what do people get wrong about being a musician?
I think some people look at it as a selfish act, to chase something. I just look at music as wanting to communicate and wanting to help. That's what music is for me. So it's hard for me to say someone's getting it wrong if they don't view it the way I do. But I think if you're chasing it for fortune, fame, all of these things, I would say that's wrong, because, and I don't know how to say this, but like, music doesn't care about you. Music cares about music. Music will channel through you. It doesn't care about your family and your hopes and your dreams. If you show up and be authentic, music is going to reward you. But if you're just in it for money and popularity, you're going to get very humbled by music. So when you love doing it every day and the money's not there and the fame's not there, that's why you continue to do it, because you love doing it. You can't go a day. I tell people, if you can go a day without thinking about music, creating it, romanticizing about it, you shouldn't be a professional musician. Doesn't mean you shouldn't play music. You shouldn't do it for a living, because I can't go a day without thinking about it. It's impossible. I've tried. I just can't.
I love it. I feel the exact same way. Well, Ella, thank you so much for coming on the Rhynestone podcast. It has been so amazing to hear your story, get all this incredible info. I think people are going to really find a lot of stuff in here incredibly useful and incredibly impactful on their own musical journeys. Ella, the floor is yours. If you want to promote anything, plug anything, take it away.
Well, first of all, thank you for thinking of me and having me on here. And this was a lot of fun for me. You asked really great questions. So thank you for, doing your research and taking an interest in what I do. As far as plugging things, I guess I'm most active on Instagram. And supporting me on Patreon, if my teaching moves you and you're learning things, would love your support, and I love to just be active on Patreon and teach there. I feel like it's just sort of feels like home. It's nice to like have a community where you feel like you're valued and people appreciate what you do. Those are kind of the main things that I'm pushing. I think there's a lot of great things coming out soon. I've been working with Wolfpack and Bootsy Collins and Charlie Hunter and some other stuff I can't mention. Just Guitar Player just did a 5-page article on me. So there's just been some really cool things that have been happening for me. And I'm just very, very grateful.
I am excited for a Wolfpack collab with you. That sounds so perfect.
Thanks.
That sounds awesome. I can't wait to hear all this stuff. Well, again, Ella, thank you so much for showing up on the Rhynestone podcast. I hope we can do this again sometime for sure.
Sure. Absolutely.
Hey, everybody, that is our podcast. I want to thank Ella for coming on the Rhynestone podcast. Ella was so delightful to talk to. We had such a good time. As you guys saw in there, time just slipped because we were just having so much fun talking and kind of diving into all these different concepts. And Ella is an incredibly thoughtful and articulate person, and she has really thought about every little thing in her musicality. And I think that's so fascinating. And it's why I think she is shining right now on the Instagram world and the TikTok world, because so many people just see what she's been able to do. Getting to work with Silk Sonic and stuff like that, I think it's just really cool. And Ella's just done such a phenomenal job. Loved having her on. It was great. So, intro and outro music, as always, is Target Rockstar by Maddie Music Madness. My name is Banner Driskell. You can find me anywhere online at Banner Driskell Media. Our email address is rhynestonemusic@gmail.com. That's RHYNESTONE music@gmail.com. If you have any questions, concerns, you want to hook up with our virtual studio, whatever you want to do, it's all there. And then last but not least, please subscribe to the channel. It helps out so much. We've got a lot of really cool guests lined up, but the more subscribers, the more views, the more stuff like that, the more engagement we get, the more it helps. And I want you guys to learn. I want you guys to grow with us. We're 15 episodes in at this point. I think it's a 16. This might be 16. And we're just not stopping. I mean, the views are going up. And, the thing we do need, unfortunately, is we do need subscribers in order to get bigger and better guests. Someday I want to interview, Paul McCartney before he dies. I want to interview, who was I thinking? I was thinking about Clive Davis would be a fun interview. I got a bunch of people. I got like a list of like 200 people I want to interview. And if we have better subscribers, we're going to get those numbers up. And so that's something I want to do. So anyway, guys, thanks for listening. Until next time.